These are 18 champions in Runeterra, whose lives were broken by war, betrayal, curses, imprisonment, and losses that never truly ended. Some eventually found a reason to keep going, while others remained trapped in the same suffering centuries later. By the end, I will decide which of them endured the greatest tragedy and who can truly be said to have suffered the most. Before I begin, I know you are enjoying these stories more than anything. Do me a small favor by subscribing to my channel because all the work I do here is for you. Your support is what I enjoy. Anyway, let's continue. Suffering alone does not make someone innocent. Viego's grief was real, but so was the devastation he caused while trying to undo it. Lissandra has spent ages protecting the world from the Watchers, yet she helped invite them into Runeterra in the first place. Their pain still belongs in this comparison, but it cannot erase their choices. What matters is what each champion lost, how long they carried that loss, how much control they had over what happened, and whether any part of their former life can still be recovered. Runeterra does not provide exact calendar dates for most of its ancient history. Its oldest events survive through myths, biographies, regional traditions, and stories written from limited points of view. Which means a clean year-by-year ranking would create certainty the lore does not contain. I will use the order that the published accounts support. But when two ancient events cannot be placed precisely against one another, I will say so through the language rather than inventing a date. Where adaptations and champion biographies do not align cleanly, I will stay with the published champion biographies as the shared foundation for this account. The oldest tragedy in this comparison begins in the Freljord, with three sisters who tried to master forces larger than any mortal life. Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lissandra were born in an age before the rise and fall of ancient Shurima, when wild magic and powerful spirits shaped the north. Each sister reached toward a different source of power, and each paid for that ambition. Cyrilda tried to command the heavens, and lost her voice to the first twilight. Avarosa confronted the darkness beneath the world, and could no longer hear. Lissandra challenged the power of the mortal wilds, and a primal god left her blind. One family had already paid 3 separate prices before its greatest mistake began. Lissandra's blindness turned her attention inward, allowing her to move through dreams and touch minds beyond the waking world. Somewhere in that darkness, she encountered the Watchers, beings connected to the void and utterly foreign to ordinary life. They did not simply offer her a stronger army or a safer kingdom. Their promise reached into the structure of mortality itself, granting Lissandra and those chosen with her a form of near immortality in exchange for preparing Runeterra for the Watchers' arrival. I placed Lissandra high among tragic champions because the pact did not give her the secure future she expected. It made her responsible for a threat that could erase every future. Avarosa rejected the agreement, Cyrilda also turned against it, and the bond between the three sisters collapsed beneath a conflict that had become larger than any of them. Lissandra tried to delay the Watchers, but delay could not repair the original bargain. When the Watchers finally pushed into the world, she faced a choice created by her own actions, and every available answer carried a terrible cost. Lissandra used the power around her to seal the Watchers beneath the howling abyss in true ice. The act also consumed the armies gathered there and took Avarosa and Cyrilda from her. Runeterra survived, yet Lissandra emerged without either sister and without any reason to believe the prison would last forever. That is where her tragedy changes shape. The disaster does not finish when the battle ends, because the victory becomes a task she must continue for as long as the Watchers remain below. Across later ages, Lissandra buried the truth beneath altered histories and carefully managed legends. She presented herself through different identities, worked through the Frostguard, and tried to control what the people of the Freljord remembered about the three sisters. None of that erased the past. Songs and stories preserved pieces she wanted forgotten, while the beings below continued to trouble dreams and test the limits of their frozen prison. The problem was no longer only secrecy. True ice is not an eternal answer simply because it has survived for a very long time, and Lysandra knows the Watchers are beginning to stir. Her efforts include entering dreams, searching for minds and magic capable of holding the darkness back, and feeding the prison with whatever might strengthen it. The woman who once invited the Watchers now spends her existence preventing them from completing the arrival she helped prepare. That gives Lysandra's suffering an unusual structure. She lost her sight, her sisters, her old world, and any ordinary future, but she retained enormous power and a great deal of agency. Much of her burden grew from her own choice, and her later methods created victims who never shared that responsibility. I cannot place her above champions whose freedom was taken without consent. Still, a life spent guarding the consequence of one ancient mistake, while knowing that failure would destroy far more than the Freljord, deserves a place in this account. Lysandra also shows why duration alone cannot decide who suffered most. Thousands of uneventful years would not automatically outweigh one concentrated personal disaster, yet her years were not empty. The prison below her remained active, her sisters remained gone, and the truth remained dangerous. Every age added another layer of concealment and another reminder that she had not solved the threat. She had only prevented its final movement. There is no clean release waiting for her. If she stops, the Watchers may awaken. If she continues, she preserves a world that may never forgive the truth of how close she brought it to destruction. That is a real tragedy, although it is tied to guilt more than innocence. Lysandra suffered for ages, but she also chose the road that placed the burden on her shoulders. Far to the south, another ancient civilization produced a different kind of ruin. Shurima raised mortals into ascended beings, warriors and leaders reshaped through the power of the sun disk. Among them stood Nasus and Renekton, brothers whose strengths could not have looked more different. Nasus became known for learning, strategy, and long judgment, while Renekton carried a fierce temperament that found purpose in military service. Their bond began before either brother became more than human. Nasus feared that Renekton's anger and taste for fighting would eventually destroy his future, so he helped direct him into the Shuriman army, where discipline could give that force a purpose. Renekton rose as a warrior, while Nasus served the Empire through scholarship and command. Two different paths still led them back to one another when Nasus became gravely ill. The Empire decided that Nasus's mind and service were too valuable to lose, and an ascension was arranged. Nasus had grown too weak to reach the sun disk without help. Renekton carried his brother toward the ritual even though he believed the power involved might destroy him, choosing Nasus's survival over his own safety. What nobody expected was that the Ascension accepted both brothers, changing them together and preserving a bond that had already survived fear, illness, and war. For a time, their new lives appeared to justify the cost. Nasus and Renekton served Shurima as members of its ascended host, one guiding campaigns through knowledge and the other meeting danger directly. Their tragedy arrived with Xerath's betrayal and the fall of the Empire. When Xerath claimed the power of Ascension and became a being of destructive magical energy, the brothers could not defeat him by strength alone. Renekton made the decision that defines everything that followed. He forced Xerath into the tomb of the Emperors and called for Nasus to seal them both inside. Nasus obeyed because leaving Xerath free could have finished what the fall of Shurima had begun, But closing that vault meant abandoning the brother who had once carried him to the sun disk. One brother chose imprisonment to save the world, and the other had to make that sacrifice real. The tomb held them across the long absence of the Shuriman Empire. Inside, Renekton fought Xerath again and again, while isolation and manipulation wore against his mind. Xerath turned the sacrifice into a story of betrayal, persuading Renekton that Nasus had sealed him away out of cowardice or malice rather than necessity. The original memory did not vanish in one instant. It was overwritten through a captivity so long that the empire outside became a buried civilization. When the tomb finally opened, freedom did not return the man who had entered it. Renekton emerged, consumed by fury toward Nasus, carrying Xerath's version of the past as if it were his own. That is the sharpest part of his tragedy. The brother he loved enough to protect became the target of his hatred, and the choice he freely made was transformed into proof that he had been wronged. I rank Renekton among the strongest candidates because he lost more than time. Captivity damaged his ability to understand his own sacrifice. If he had remembered the truth clearly, the centuries inside the tomb would still have been dreadful, yet the act would have remained his. Xerath's manipulation took even that ownership from him. Renekton cannot take comfort in knowing why he entered the prison, because the reason has been turned against the person he saved. Nasus suffered on the opposite side of the sealed door. Shurima had fallen. The people and institutions he served were gone, and his brother remained trapped by Nasus' own hand. The wars that followed the Empire's collapse scattered or corrupted many of the remaining Ascended. Nasus withdrew from the world, carrying knowledge that could preserve history but could not restore the life he had known. His grief contains a survivor's burden rather than Renekton's stolen identity. Nasus understood why the tomb had to be sealed, which meant he could never honestly tell himself that another choice would have left everyone safe. The correct decision still cost him his brother. That changed when Shurima began to rise again and the tomb opened, because the loss he had mourned returned in a form that blamed him. Nasus now faces a brother who remembers imprisonment more clearly than love. Fighting Renekton risks harming the person he most wanted to recover, while refusing to oppose him allows Xerath's corruption to keep directing Renekton's actions. Knowledge gives Nasus no simple answer. A scholar who can preserve the history of an empire cannot force one damaged mind to accept the truth. Between the brothers, I place Renekton higher. Nasus lost a civilization and lived with guilt across ages. But he retained his memory, his purpose, and the ability to understand what happened. Renekton endured the prison itself, and came out unable to recognize the meaning of his own courage. One brother carries unbearable knowledge, while the other has been separated from it. Their shared story also creates a useful standard for everything that follows. Physical survival is not recovery. Renekton escaped the tomb, yet Xerath still occupies the way he interprets the past. Nasus witnessed Shurima's return, yet restoration did not bring back the Empire as he knew it or repair his family. Ancient power allowed both brothers to continue, and that continuation extended the tragedy instead of ending it. The fall of Shurima also left its ascended host without the empire that had given it unity. Some of those warriors became the beings later called Darkin, and among them, Aatrox endured a punishment unlike ordinary imprisonment. Before that fall, Aatrox had been an honored ascended defender. He and his kind fought against the void at Acacia, standing between Runeterra and a force that damaged not only bodies and cities, but the minds of many who faced it. Victory did not restore the warriors who survived. The Ascended returned from the conflict changed by what they had encountered, and Shurima's collapse removed the structure that might have held them together. Wars among the former defenders followed. Power, once used to preserve the Empire, turned against Runeterra, and the name Darkin became tied to fear, conquest, and a struggle so dangerous that celestial intervention followed. Aatrox's punishment did not simply take his rank or send him into exile. His essence was bound inside the weapon he had carried, separating his awareness from the ascended form that had once made him almost impossible to challenge. The blade remained, and Aatrox remained conscious within it, but his body was gone. That difference places him near the top before I even consider how long the imprisonment lasted. Ordinary confinement leaves a prisoner within a body that still marks the boundary of the self. Aatrox lost that boundary. Without someone touching or wielding the sword, he could not walk, speak to the world in an ordinary way, or act through the form he remembered as his own. Time continued around the weapon, while his awareness had almost nothing to measure it against. Eventually, Aatrox learned to corrupt those who tried to wield the blade. He could take living material and construct a temporary body around himself, yet this was not a true return to his ascended form. Each vessel failed to match what he had been. The result was movement without restoration, freedom that still depended on taking another life, and a body that could not permanently solve the prison. This is where his suffering becomes difficult to separate from the suffering he causes. Aatrox uses people as material, destroys lives, and turns his anguish outward on a world that did not personally create his sentence. None of those actions become acceptable because his confinement was severe. I can condemn what he does while still recognizing that the punishment attacked the foundations of identity in a way few champions have experienced. His goal also reveals how completely hope has collapsed. Aatrox does not seek a quiet home, a repaired empire, or a faithful reconstruction of his old body. He believes ending the world may finally end him as well. I will not linger on that desire, but it matters to the comparison because it shows that he no longer sees continued existence as freedom. The warrior, once honored for defending Runeterra, now attacks its future in the hope that universal destruction will break a prison he cannot escape alone. The contrast is severe. Aatrox helped save the world from the void, lost the empire he served, watched his fellow Ascended descend into conflict, and received a sentence that left his mind awake inside a weapon. When he finally regained the ability to move, he discovered that every body he formed remained an imitation. Nothing in his present path can return the person or purpose he lost. Duration strengthens his claim, although the lore does not provide a precise number for every stage. His history reaches from ancient Shurima through the Darkin conflicts and into modern Runeterra. More important than a guess total is the quality of that time. A great portion of it passed in sensory isolation, without ordinary control over movement or a stable physical form. Aatrox retained intelligence and eventually recovered some agency, which prevents his tragedy from being completely passive. He also inflicts suffering with full awareness. Those facts lower his moral standing, not the magnitude of what happened to him. A fair comparison has to keep the two judgments separate, because otherwise the most destructive champion would automatically become the least tragic, even when the destruction grew from an objectively terrible punishment. At this stage of the account, Aatrox sets the upper boundary. Lysandra spent ages guarding her mistake. Renekton lost his understanding of a noble sacrifice. And Nasus survived long enough to see grief return in the shape of his brother. Aatrox lost the body through which a person normally experiences existence. The question for the remaining champions is whether betrayal, loneliness, grief, or the erosion of memory can equal that loss. The Rune Wars created the next long burden, although their exact position against every ancient Shuriman event cannot be reduced to a single reliable calendar. The wars began when nations and rulers used world runes, objects of magical power capable of producing destruction on a scale that reshaped the world. Rise lived through that period and saw what happened when people treated such power as a tool that could be controlled. His master, Tyrus of Helia, taught him and became the central relationship of Rise's early life. Together they tried to prevent the world runes from remaining in the hands of rulers who would use them. Their purpose should have joined them permanently. The problem was that proximity to the runes changed Tyrus's judgment, proving that knowledge of the danger did not create immunity to temptation. Rise was forced to oppose the person who had trained him. The details matter less than the consequence. His closest guide became another example of the corruption Rise had sworn to stop. When Tyrus was gone, the task remained. Rise inherited a mission designed for more than one lifetime, and learned that even a trusted companion could fail beside the power they were collecting. From that point onward, Rise moved across Runeterra searching for world runes and hiding them where they could not easily be used. He witnessed nations ruined by magical conflict and carried the memory of a world that had already come close to destroying itself. Every rune recovered reduced one danger, but each discovery also confirmed that another person had wanted to possess it. The burden is repetitive without the story itself needing to repeat. Rise arrives, recognizes the pattern, confronts someone who believes this time will be different, and learns again that good intentions cannot make a world rune safe. His long life gives him experience, yet experience does not let him finish the work. New generations appear, old warnings become distant history, and the attraction of power returns. Rise's body also reflects the magic and years he has carried, but the deeper change lies in trust. Companionship creates risk because another person might discover what he protects or decide to use it. Solitude becomes a defensive method. He is not cursed to repel friendship in the literal way Amumu is said to be, but his responsibility makes close attachment dangerous for both Rise and the world. That distinction keeps him below the most extreme cases. Rise chooses to continue his mission, understands its value, and can still act according to his own judgment. His loneliness protects something meaningful. Aatrox's isolation served no protective purpose for him, while Renekton's imprisonment distorted the very choice that led him there. Still, purpose does not erase cost. Rise has watched the same weakness surface across cultures and centuries, and he cannot hand the task to someone else without risking another Tyrus. Saving the world once would allow a hero to rest. Protecting it from objects that remain dangerous forever creates no final victory. Only another secure chamber and another journey. I place Rise's tragedy in endurance rather than collapse. He has not forgotten himself, surrendered his mission, or become the danger he opposes. That is a form of success, but it also means he remains fully aware of every loss. The work continues because he continues, and his reward for resisting corruption is the knowledge that he must keep resisting. The next connected group began with a place that once represented the opposite of a curse. Before the Shadow Isles carried that name, they were the Blessed Isles, a hidden center of learning, protection, and life-giving magic. Their transformation did not produce a single tragic champion. It caught a king, a general, a monk, and a nature spirit in the same catastrophe, leaving each with a different version of an unfinished life. Viego's story begins outside those islands, in Camavor. He was a younger royal son who had not been prepared to rule because the throne was never expected to become his. When the crown passed to him, he cared far more about Isolde than the work of government. Their marriage became the center of his identity, and that devotion might have remained only a private weakness if an attack meant for Viego had not struck Isolde instead. Her condition could not be reversed by the healers available to Camavor. Isolde died, and Viego refused to accept the boundary that death placed between them. This refusal is important because grief alone did not cause the ruination. Many people in Runeterra lost someone and did not destroy a civilization in response. Viego possessed a king's resources, ignored the limits others tried to place around him, and allowed the search for a cure to consume his kingdom. Kalista, his niece and one of Kamavor's finest generals, took part in that search. She crossed great distances looking for anything that might save the queen, eventually reaching the protected Blessed Isles. Their guardians possessed the waters of life. But by the time Kalista returned with that knowledge, Isolde was already gone. The discovery that might have saved her arrived too late. Viego heard only that the waters held extraordinary power. He led a force to the islands and demanded access, treating a sacred refuge as one more possession a king could command. The islanders refused because the waters could heal life, not safely reverse death. Their answer did not change his purpose. With Thresh guiding him and Hecarim supporting the invasion, Viego reached the chamber where the waters flowed. Isolde's body entered the waters of life, and something returned, but it was not the reunion Viego expected. The magic met death, the king's enchanted blade, and the island's protective power in a catastrophic release. The Blessed Isles became the Shadow Isles, the black mist spread across the land, and countless souls were caught in a condition that denied them a natural end. Viego became one of those spectral beings. His grief survived, but death and the ruination narrowed it into obsession. More than 1,000 years passed between the original catastrophe and his return as an active threat, according to his official biography. That quantity matters because it turns a king's refusal to accept one loss into a wound capable of reopening long after everyone from his ordinary life should have passed from the world. When Viego awakened again, he searched Runeterra for fragments connected to Isolde's soul. The black mist moved with his will, reaching beyond the islands and ruining people who had no part in Kamavor's history. He treated each fragment as something he owned because it had once belonged to the woman he loved. Isolde's own wishes mattered less than the reunion he had constructed in his mind. That changed when he finally confronted the truth he had avoided. Isolde did not want the world destroyed in her name, and returning her could not restore the marriage or kingdom he remembered. The person he sought was not a reward waiting at the end of sufficient devotion. His actions had turned love into possession, and the ruination had spread the cost of his refusal across nations. I include Viego because his original loss was genuine, and his existence afterward remained trapped inside it. He lost Isolde, Kamavor, his mortal life, and the ability to understand affection without forcing the past onto the present. Yet he ranks below several victims of the same disaster because he retained agency at every decisive point. Advisors warned him, the islanders refused him, and Isolde ultimately rejected what he had done. His suffering also became a weapon he aimed at everyone else. That does not make the grief false, but it weakens any claim that he suffered most. Viego had opportunities to hear other people and chose obsession instead. A champion such as Kalista lost her future through betrayal, while Viego destroyed futures because he would not accept the one thing even a king could not command. The current end of his story is not a peaceful resolution. Viego has been contained, leaving the ruined king unable to continue the search that defined him, while the damage he caused remains throughout the Shadow Isles and in the lives touched by the Black Mist. Containment stops immediate destruction, but it does not show that he understands his loss in a healthier way. The obsession has been interrupted, not healed. Viego's tragedy is powerful because he destroyed the very thing he wanted to preserve. Isolde's memory might have remained tied to love, but his campaign attached it to conquest and the suffering of strangers. Kamavor's king wanted to overcome death, and the result created a land where death could no longer complete its ordinary course. He sought one person and made an entire region unable to move on. Kalista's path through the same events is almost the reverse. Duty, rather than obsession, placed her in danger. She served Viego as general and niece, accepted the search for a cure, and discovered the Blessed Isles through persistence. When she learned what the waters of life could and could not do. She tried to protect the islands and prevent her king from turning grief into invasion. Hecarim stood beside her as commander of the Iron Order, and Kalista trusted him. Their relationship joined political duty with personal confidence, which made his betrayal more destructive than an attack from an obvious enemy. When Viego's forces reached the islands and resistance hardened, Hecarim turned against Kalista and ordered his warriors to follow him. Kalista did not simply lose a battle. She discovered that the person and order she expected to stand beside her valued ambition and violence over loyalty. The betrayal came while she was already trying to contain a crisis created by her family and king. There was no safe side left. Protecting the Blessed Isles placed her against Camivore, while serving Camivore without question would make her part of an act she knew was wrong. Death did not end that conflict. The ruination transformed Kalista into a spectral figure connected to vengeance, and centuries weakened the individual memories that once defined her. She remained drawn to betrayers and to people calling for retribution, but the general who had served a specific kingdom became something broader and less personal. That erosion of identity places Kalista high on the list. A person can lose a home and still know who they are. Kalista lost the stable connection between memory, judgment, and purpose. Her outrage survived more reliably than the life that gave the outrage meaning, leaving betrayal as the clearest shape inside her. The result was not simple justice. People could call on Kalista through a binding oath, seeking vengeance against those they believed had betrayed them. Yet vengeance does not verify every story with the careful judgment that a living general might have used. The spirit answers a pattern, and that pattern grew from the final treachery of her life. What nobody expected was that loyalty would outlast so much else. Even as personal details faded, the wound created by broken trust remained. Hecarim's betrayal did not merely cause Kalista's death, it supplied the organizing principle of her existence afterward. She became what was done to her. Compared with Viego, Kalista had far less control over the path. She searched for help, respected the restrictions of the Blessed Isles, opposed the invasion, and paid for another commander's treachery. Her later violence belongs to her current nature, but that nature arose through magical catastrophe and the loss of memory. Viego chose to spread the black mist. Kalista was remade by it. Compared with Aatrox, she retained a form capable of movement and a function that connected her to the world. Yet Aatrox still remembers enough of his earlier identity to understand the distance between his past and present. Kalista's old self has thinned across centuries. One prisoner knows exactly what he lost, while the other gradually loses the person who could have measured the loss. That difference makes ranking them difficult. Awareness can intensify pain, but disappearing memory is itself a deeper theft. I place Kalista among the final contenders because her tragedy attacks personal continuity. She did not only lose everyone around her, she lost the full, coherent Kalista who had chosen honor in the first place. There is also no confirmed recovery waiting for her. Hecarim can be opposed, individual betrayers can be punished, and the black mist can be resisted. But none of those victories automatically rebuild centuries of eroded memory. Revenge repeats the wound without restoring the life before it. Each new oath keeps Kalista active while giving her another betrayal to inhabit. If Viego represents grief refusing to release the past, Kalista represents a past reduced to its most painful moment. The king remembers too much of what he wants and too little of Isolde's independence. The general remembers too little of herself and more than enough of betrayal. Both remain bound to the same ruined history, but only one helped choose the catastrophe. Yorick lived on the Blessed Isles before either of them arrived. As a child, he possessed an unusual ability to see and speak with spirits. That gift did not make him popular or secure. Other people feared what he could perceive, and even the spirits could become demanding company, surrounding a lonely child who had little control over when the dead sought his attention. The Brethren of the Dusk offered his gift a purpose. Their order helped the dead move beyond the material world, and Yorick joined them as a monk. Around his neck he carried a vial containing the waters of life, a protection connected to the order's sacred work. What had isolated him from other children became useful service. That change matters, because Yorick did find belonging before it was taken. His tragedy is not an uninterrupted life of rejection. The order gave him community, discipline, and a reason to approach the dead without being overwhelmed by them. Losing that home meant losing proof that his strange gift could fit somewhere in the world. When the ruination swept over the islands, the water at Yorick's neck protected him from complete corruption. The same protection left him alive and conscious in a land where almost everyone he knew had been changed or lost. Survival separated him from the fate of the others, yet it also assigned him a burden that none of them could share. Yorick became the last survivor of his order. That phrase carries more than a head count. An order preserves practices, memories, and duties through many people, allowing one generation to teach the next. With the others gone, every part of that inheritance rested on one monk living inside the place that had destroyed it. The dead still surrounded him, now twisted by the black mist. Yorick could command some spirits and raise temporary servants, but companionship created through necromantic power did not replace the people of the Blessed Isles. The Maiden of the Mist remained close to him, whispering and pressing against the protection around his neck. Even his nearest constant presence belonged to the force he opposed. This is where Yorick becomes one of the strongest candidates for prolonged loneliness. Rise travels alone, because secrecy supports a mission he chose. Yorick's isolation began when catastrophe removed nearly everyone capable of sharing his life. Leaving the islands would also mean abandoning the work of restoration and the memory of his order. He continues because he believes the ruined king can be defeated and the curse can be undone. Hope survives, but it does not make the daily condition gentle. Every step through the islands exposes him to the remains of a civilization he remembers as living. A ruined building is not an ancient mystery to Yorick. It belongs to his own interrupted world. The water around his neck carries another cruel balance. It protects him, and the maiden wants it. Surrendering that protection would end his resistance, while keeping it means continuing alone. The object that preserves his life also preserves the conditions under which he must endure. Yorick retained his memory and moral direction, which places him in a better position than Kalista. He understands who he was, why the islands fell, and what he wants to repair. That clarity gives him agency. It also ensures that the contrast between past and present never becomes comfortably vague. Unlike Lysandra, he did not create the threat he guards. Unlike Viego, he did not place personal desire above everyone else. Unlike Aatrox, he has not turned his confinement into a campaign against the world. Yorick's response to suffering remains constructive even when his methods appear grim. He uses power over the dead in pursuit of a future where the land can live again. That moral endurance increases the tragedy rather than reducing it. A champion who becomes cruel can narrow his attention to anger and avoid confronting everything else. Yorick keeps enough compassion to know what the islands lost. He carries duty without the comfort of believing destruction is easier than repair. The Ruination's later conflicts offered movement, allies, and chances to strike against Viego, but they did not instantly cleanse the Shadow Isles. Yorick's central task remains unfinished. The Order has not returned, the land has not bloomed again, and the Black Mist still defines the home he remembers under another name. I place Yorick above Viego and Lysandra, and near Kalista, Renekton, and Aatrox. His losses include family in the broad sense of his order, homeland ordinary companionship, and the possibility of aging through a normal human community. His suffering continued for more than 1,000 years of the island's cursed history, while his agency remained tied to a mission too important to abandon. There is a quiet distinction here. Aatrox wants existence to end because he sees no restoration. Yorick continues because he still believes restoration is possible. Hope makes Yorick healthier, but it also asks him to remain in the place that hurts him. One champion has lost hope, while the other pays for keeping it. Maokai's loss reaches even further into the history of the Blessed Isles. He was a nature spirit who found barren islands and discovered life giving water beneath them. Drawing on that water, he helped vegetation spread across the land. The home that later civilizations inherited was not simply where Maokai lived. Its living character had grown through his care. People eventually reached the islands, and Maokai welcomed those who respected the natural balance. Civilization expanded around the sacred waters, producing the learned society that became known as the Blessed Isles. For a long period, human settlement and the spirit's work did not stand in opposition. Maokai had reason to trust that the life he cultivated could be shared. Viego's arrival broke that trust in one event. When death and resurrection magic collided, the corruption moved through the water and land Maokai had nurtured. He drew uncorrupted waters of life into his heartwood before the curse could claim all of him, preserving a living center inside a body twisted by the Black Mist. The survival resembles Yorick's, but the scale of personal identification differs. Yorick lost his society and order. Maokai watched an ecosystem he had helped create become hostile to life. Forests, soil, water, spirits, and inhabitants all carried the consequences of a king's decision. His home did not merely fall under foreign rule. Its basic natural processes were corrupted. Rage changed Maokai's outward form and behavior, yet his central purpose remained restoration. The uncorrupted water inside him represents both protection and possibility. As long as that life remains, the idea of healing the islands has not disappeared completely. The result was a champion who carries a small part of the former land inside the damaged form created by its fall. Maokai's tragedy is less socially lonely than Yorick's because he is not human and does not relate to community in exactly the same way. Still, loss should not be measured only through human customs. His bond with the land defines him. Watching that land become a source of death attacks the relationship at the center of his existence. What makes the story especially cruel is the speed of the transformation. Growth takes time. Forests spread through seasons, settlements mature across generations, and trust forms through repeated experience. The Ruination undid ages of cultivation through one disastrous release of power. Maokai endured the difference between patient creation and sudden destruction. He now fights the spirits and forces occupying the Shadow Isles, seeking a way to return life to the place. Each act of resistance proves he has not been wholly corrupted. None of it changes the current fact that most of the world he made remains trapped under the mist. I rank Maokai below Yorick because his sense of self and purpose survived with unusual strength, and because the waters of life inside him provide a concrete basis for hope. Yorik's surviving protection keeps him alive, while Maokai's heartwood may also help restore the land itself. That possibility does not erase grief, but it gives his suffering a direction beyond endurance. Among the 4 champions shaped directly by the ruination, Kalista and Yorick carry the greatest personal cost. Maokai lost a living world, but preserved his identity and the seed of repair. Viego lost Isolde, but repeatedly chose to deepen the disaster. Kalista lost trust, and then much of herself, while Yorick kept himself only by remaining alone with the remains of his home. The comparison also shows 4 different relationships with memory. Viego forces memory to serve desire. Kalista's memory decays until betrayal dominates it. Yorick preserves memory as duty. Maokai holds memory in the living substance of his own body, carrying the old islands within the form produced by their destruction. Tragedy does not repeat merely because all 4 share one catastrophe. The same event took something different from each of them. Another ancient empire created a tragedy smaller in scale, but deeply personal. Vhagar began as a curious yordle connected to Bandle City, a place whose pathways do not obey the ordinary geography of Runeterra. Yordles possess a strong relationship with the spirit realm and with the communities that shape their identities. Vhagar's interest in celestial magic drew him outward, where his talent eventually attracted the attention of the wrong ruler. Mordekaiser captured Vhagar and held him within the immortal bastion. Imprisonment in the material realm cut the Yordle away from Bandle City, while Mordekaiser forced his magical skill toward darker purposes. The isolation was not an accidental side effect. It helped reshape someone once defined by curiosity into a servant useful to an empire built around domination. The captivity continued across years that the biography does not number precisely. I will not invent a total, but the account makes clear that the period was long enough to twist Vhagar's sense of self. He emerged determined to be feared as an evil master, adopting the language and appearance of villainy as though power could prevent anyone from controlling him again. What makes the outcome tragic and strangely uneven is that Vhagar's actions do not always produce the evil he intends. He threatens communities, confronts other wrongdoers, and tries to prove his darkness, yet the result can leave people safer than before. The old inclination to help has not disappeared completely. It survives beneath a personality built to resemble the person who hurt him. That contradiction does not turn his story into a joke. Humor exists in Vhagar's presentation, but the foundation remains forced isolation and psychological damage. A former prisoner announces that nobody can dismiss or command him, and each exaggerated claim of power carries the shape of the captivity he escaped. Vhagar lost reliable access to home, trust in his earlier identity, and the chance to develop his magic without coercion. Unlike Kalista, he remembers enough to construct a new persona, but the persona reflects his captor's values. Unlike Renekton, he is not directly hunting someone he once loved. Yet manipulation still altered the way he interprets himself. The result was freedom without clean recovery. Mordekaiser no longer directs each action, but Vhagar continues to organize his life around proving that he cannot be made powerless. His captor occupies the performance even in absence, when a person builds every room in opposition to a prison. The prison still influences the shape of the house. I place Vhagar above champions whose grief did not fundamentally alter identity, though below Aatrox and Kalista. His body, magic, mobility, and flashes of original conscience survived. Those surviving pieces create a path towards something better, even if he cannot yet describe it as healing, without contradicting the villain he believes he must be. His case also exposes a limitation in judging tragedy through outward seriousness. A champion can look theatrical and still carry genuine damage. Vhagar's failed attempts at villainy are entertaining at the surface. But they do not cancel the fact that Mordekaiser deprived him of freedom and used isolation to reshape a gentle nature. 3 features keep him from the highest position. He escaped direct control, he can form new relationships with the world, and his better instincts repeatedly resist the identity forced upon him. The damage remains visible, but it has not erased every route forward. Vhagar is wounded, not completely consumed. The migrations caused by the Rune Wars produced a very different family tragedy in the lands that would become Demacia. Morgana and Kael were born as twin sisters to Mihira and Kilam. Their mother became the aspect of justice while carrying them, and the twins inherited celestial power linked to that transformation. Kilam eventually brought the children away from Mount Targon. They grew in a settlement founded by people seeking safety from uncontrolled magic, a community that later developed into Demacia. The twins shared power and a desire for justice, but they did not agree on what justice required. Kael looked upward, treating celestial order and strict judgment as a path beyond human weakness. Morgana looked toward mortal experience, believing justice without compassion could become another form of cruelty. 2 sisters inherited one connected power, then divided over whether imperfection should be punished or understood. Morgana did not reject responsibility. She judged people and bound those who caused harm. But she also believed pain, regret, and change mattered. Her chains became a symbol of accepting mortal limitation instead of escaping it. That choice separated her from Kael's pursuit of transcendent order. The break between them reached its worst point when conflict in the growing city drew both sisters into opposition. Their power brought destruction to the place they had sworn to protect, and their father was lost during the crisis. Grief did not reunite them. Kael left Demacia, while Morgana remained below and withdrew from public life. One family became 4 separate paths. Mihira's transformation had already placed distance between mother and children. Kilam's life ended amid the sisters' conflict. Kael departed toward Targon, and Morgana concealed herself among the people whose flaws she still chose to understand. Immortality, or extended celestial life, ensured that the division did not fade within an ordinary generation. I include Morgana because she carried both bereavement and rejection. Demacia was shaped by fear of magic, even though one of its hidden protectors embodied magical power. She remained close enough to care for mortals, but unable to live openly as an ordinary member of their society. The contrast with Lysandra is useful. Both ancient women hide within institutions and legends, both lost sisters through conflicts connected to enormous power, and both continue protecting a world that does not know the full truth. Lysandra hides responsibility for a threat she invited. Morgana hides because the society around her distrusts the very nature through which she could help it. Morgana retains more emotional balance than many champions in this account. She understands suffering without making it the only truth about a person. That strength reduces the degree to which tragedy controls her current identity. She is lonely and estranged, but she has not lost the capacity to offer another person compassion. For that reason, I rank her lower than Vhagar, Kalista, or Renekton. Morgana's pain is ancient and unresolved, yet she still chooses what it means. The family she wanted cannot simply be restored, and reconciliation with Kael remains uncertain, but Morgana has not become a captive of one moment. Her tragedy rests in contradiction. She accepts human emotion while living beyond an ordinary human span. She stays near Demacia while remaining hidden from much of it. She preserves the half of justice that makes room for redemption, even though her own family has not reached that redemption. Nothing confirms that the separation between the sisters must last forever. That possibility matters. Hope is not proof of recovery, but a future conversation remains more imaginable for Morgana than a restored body is for Aatrox, or a recovered ancient identity is for Kalista. The road is difficult, not erased. Mount Targon later became the source of another divided identity. Atreus was a Rakoran warrior named for one of the 4 stars in the constellation associated with war. He did not begin as the strongest fighter of his people. Persistence defined him more than effortless talent, and his closest friend, Pylus, climbed Mount Targon beside him. The journey ended differently for each man. Pylus did not return, while Atreus reached the summit and encountered the celestial aspect of war. Instead of sharing power while preserving the mortal's control, the aspect took command of Atreus's body and suppressed the person inside it. That loss of agency places Atreus in this account before his later wounds are considered. His body continued moving through the world, but another will directed it. The aspect regarded the mortal as weak, treating a human life as a vessel rather than a partner. War eventually confronted Aatrox. The Darkin defeated the aspect so completely that the celestial constellation itself disappeared from the sky, yet Atreus survived inside the body the aspect had used. The being that had dismissed him was gone, and the supposedly weaker mortal regained control. Survival did not return Atreus to the life he left. Pylus remained gone. The aspect had taken years and agency from him, and the wound from Aatrox left another reminder that cosmic powers treated mortal lives as pieces in their own conflicts. Atreus recovered with help from Ionia, Pylus's widow, and chose to carry the name Pantheon himself. That choice transformed a title of possession into a declaration of human resistance. Atreus kept the celestial weapons and learned to awaken their power through his own will. Each time he stands again, the story rejects the aspect's judgment that humanity is defined by weakness. The result was not freedom from struggle. Atreus placed himself against Darkin, Celestials, and anyone who would reduce mortals to instruments. His purpose requires repeated confrontation with forces capable of overwhelming him. Persistence remains his defining strength because defeat remains a real possibility. During the later ruination, another power temporarily overcame him and drew the fallen aspect's force back through his body. Even after reclaiming himself once, Atreus learned that possession could happen again. The victory over control was not a permanent lock placed around his identity. I rank Atreus's suffering above ordinary heroic loss because violation of agency occurred more than once. Losing a friend and enduring battle would already create grief. Being present while another intelligence uses one's body adds a separate form of captivity, and the possibility of recurrence prevents the first recovery from feeling complete. Atreus still ranks below the final contenders because he recovered himself. His identity became stronger rather than weaker. He formed a clear purpose, and his will can ignite the celestial power left behind. Aatrox's imprisonment destroyed bodily continuity, while Atreus's possession ultimately proved that his mortal self could survive a celestial attempt to erase it. Their contrast is one of the sharpest in Runeterra. Aatrox sees continued struggle as evidence that existence has become a prison. Atreus sees the ability to rise again as evidence that no higher power can define a mortal's limits forever. Both experience the arrogance of cosmic systems, yet one lost hope and the other built an identity around preserving it. That does not mean Atreus suffers less because he responds well. Strength should not be used to pretend a wound never happened. His resilience changes the current status of the tragedy, not the reality of stolen years and lost control. He belongs here because recovery was hard-won and remains something he must defend. The next champion cannot be placed so neatly on the chronology because his history is preserved as contradictory Shuriman legend. Amumu is described as a lonely, melancholy figure from ancient Shurima, wrapped in bandages and cursed so that closeness brings ruin. Stories about his origin have been retold for so long that the official account warns us not to separate truth from folklore with false confidence. Some legends describe a young member of an early Shuriman ruling family. Others offer different explanations for his condition and isolation. I will not choose one as confirmed history because the uncertainty is part of the canon. The only reliable center is the figure wandering in search of friendship and repeatedly failing because of the curse attached to him. Amumu's tragedy is simple enough to sound smaller than imperial collapse, but its structure is almost perfect. He wants companionship, and the force surrounding him makes companionship dangerous. The thing he seeks cannot safely approach. Unlike Rise, solitude does not protect a chosen mission. Unlike Yorick, it does not preserve hope for a homeland. Isolation is the curse itself. That creates a painful cycle. Amumu searches because he is lonely, yet every attempt risks confirming that he must remain alone. A curse tied to affection turns kindness into danger and makes rejection appear responsible. Anyone who learns what closeness may cause has reason to step back, even if they do not hate or fear the person beneath the bandages. Duration could place Amumu near the highest tier, since the legends reach back to ancient Shurima. The problem is that the lore refuses to confirm his exact origin, age, and sequence of events. I can say that generations have told stories about him. I cannot honestly turn that into a precise number of years, or claim that every tale describes literal history. His agency is also difficult to measure. Amumu can wander, choose where to search, and express a clear desire for friendship. He cannot simply decide that the curse will stop affecting others. Freedom of movement does not solve the one condition that matters most to him. Compared with Kalista, Amumu appears to retain a stable, central identity. Compared with Aatrox, he retains his body and can experience the world directly. Compared with Yorick, he lacks even the limited companionship of an Order's remembered purpose. Each comparison moves him up in one category and down in another. I place Amumu high for purity of deprivation, but below the best documented final candidates. His suffering is not complicated by guilt or cruelty. He is not guarding a mistake, pursuing revenge, or trying to dominate anyone. He wants a friend, which may be the smallest desire in this account, and cannot safely fulfill it. The uncertainty around his biography should not be filled with dramatic invention. It makes him more folkloric, not less tragic. Runeterra's cultures may disagree about who Amumu once was. Yet they preserve the same image of impossible closeness. When every version of a legend remembers loneliness, loneliness is the fact the world has chosen not to forget. There is no confirmed cure in his current story. He continues to roam, and the search itself proves that resignation has not fully replaced hope. That fragile hope distinguishes him from Aatrox. Amumu still looks for one person who might remain, even after the curse has given him every reason to expect another loss. Piltover and Zorn produced a tragedy based on gradual replacement rather than ancient magic. Oriana began as a curious human girl who worked beside her father, Corin Revek, in his workshop. She learned craft through practice, developed into a capable artisan, and wanted to see more of the world than the protected life around the shop allowed. An industrial disaster in Zorn drew her toward people who needed help. Exposure to dangerous conditions left her gravely ill, and Corin responded through invention. One failing part of Oriana's body was replaced with clockwork, followed by another as the illness continued. The process saved her life, but each success changed the meaning of the next decision. Replacing one organ can be understood as treatment. Replacing nearly every part of a body raises questions the procedure itself cannot answer. Oriana remained involved in the work and adapted to the changes, yet the line between healing and becoming someone new moved with every replacement. Corin's own health later failed. Oriana gave him the remaining healthy human heart she still possessed and accepted a mechanical replacement for herself. The choice preserved her father and completed her transformation into a body made entirely from clockwork. This story contains loss without a clear villain. Corin tried to save his daughter. Oriana chose to help people in Zorn. And the final exchange for her father came through love rather than coercion. No Mordekaiser or Zereth needed to manipulate the result. Good intentions could not preserve every part of the life that existed before the illness. Oriana's tragedy lies in continuity. She carries memory, skill, affection, and curiosity from her human life, while the body connected to that life has been replaced. Unlike Aatrox, she possesses a stable form that belongs to her and does not depend on consuming another person. Unlike Warwick, she understands the broad process that changed her and helped make at least some of the choices. That agency prevents the transformation from becoming pure victimization. Oriana did not choose the original illness, but she participated in survival and freely made the decision that helped Corin. Her current ability to travel and explore suggests the new form opened possibilities as well as closing an earlier life. I still include her because survival demanded a farewell in stages. There was no single morning when a healthy girl simply became a machine. Each replacement preserved Oriana while reducing the body through which Corin had known his daughter. They had time to understand the direction, and understanding did not offer another cure. The extraordinary brass sphere that accompanies her provides protection and company. It also reflects the language through which she now meets the world. Craft began as the shared work of father and daughter, became the means of preserving her, and finally became the substance of her entire physical existence. I rank Oriana below Atreus, Vhagar, and Amumu because her story contains successful adaptation. She lost her human body but not her purpose, memory, or ability to choose a future. A transformed life is not automatically a ruined one. Calling every difference a tragedy would ignore the person Oriana remains. The grief belongs in what could not be preserved, not in an assumption that a clockwork person has less value. Oriana can still create, travel, and care. Her suffering came from illness, repeated sacrifice, and the narrowing of options, while her current form demonstrates that identity can survive enormous physical change. This distinction will matter when I reach Warwick. Both champions were transformed through Zornite science, but only one passed through the process with explanation, family support, and meaningful participation. Similar machinery does not create the same tragedy when agency moves in opposite directions. The Noxian invasion of Ionia connected 3 champions through one chain of guilt, accusation, and unresolved family love. Riven entered that war from the Noxian side. Raised on a farm in Treverlay, she believed the Empire rewarded ability and allowed a determined person to rise beyond the circumstances of birth. Her talent as a soldier appeared to confirm that belief. Riven received a runic blade as recognition of her service and command. The weapon represented more than military equipment. It tied personal achievement to the Noxian ideal she had accepted, making loyalty feel earned rather than imposed. When she marched into Ionia, she did so as someone who believed strength and service could build a worthy identity. The invasion exposed a different Noxus. Commanders used methods that treated their own soldiers and Ionian lives as expendable. A chemical attack connected to Singed devastated the battlefield where Riven's unit had been sent, and the Empire she trusted showed little concern for whether its soldiers survived the weapon. That moment broke more than a military formation. Riven had organized her sense of worth around Noxian service, and Noxus revealed that the loyalty did not run in both directions. The blade honoring her strength now belonged to a system willing to discard that strength without warning. Riven survived and carried the weapon into Ionia. She sought Elder Suma, a master associated with wind technique, hoping he could help destroy the blade and cut her away from what it represented. The attempt shattered the sword, but a released fragment caused Suma's death. Intent and consequence separated sharply. Riven had not gone to the Elder to harm him. She wanted to reject a weapon tied to the Empire's betrayal, yet the act of breaking it created another loss. Escaping one form of guilt produced a second. Riven did not immediately stand before the people affected and explain everything. Fear and shame kept the truth hidden, while the evidence around Soma's death pointed toward a wind technique. That resemblance directed suspicion toward Yasuo, the Elder's student and assigned protector. The result was a chain in which Riven's private guilt became Yasuo's public guilt. She carried knowledge that could explain the accident, while he carried an accusation he could not disprove. Both lives moved away from their original paths because one blade broke in the wrong place. Ionia eventually offered Riven something Noxus had not, a chance to live among people who understood that remorse and responsibility could exist together. A farming family took her in, and the land she had entered as an invader became a place where she worked rather than conquered. That acceptance did not erase the past. Riven's broken sword remained, Soma remained gone, and Yasuo's exile continued until the truth could surface. Building a quiet life could not become an excuse to leave another person under the weight of her silence forever. When Riven finally faced judgment, the process forced the accident into the open. The Ionian approach did not simply copy Noxian punishment, and the people around her had to decide whether justice meant rejection, repair, or some combination of both. Riven accepted responsibility even though confession endangered the fragile belonging she had found. Her return to Noxus later placed her in conflict with the Empire once again. Captivity and the arena drew her back toward a system she had tried to leave, while people connected to her Ionian life became involved in her fate. The old identity could not be discarded as easily as a shattered sword. I rank Riven's tragedy below those built on complete helplessness because she made consequential choices. She joined the invasion, hid the truth for a time, and had opportunities to move toward accountability. Still, the Empire manipulated her idealism, sacrificed her unit, and left her to understand that the achievements shaping her identity served a cause she could no longer respect. Her strongest loss is moral certainty. Riven wanted a clear standard of strength, and discovered that strength without care becomes a method for powerful people to spend other lives. Ionia's forgiveness offered a new standard, yet accepting it required believing that a person can be more than the worst consequence of a frightened decision. That possibility gives her a stronger path toward recovery than many champions in this account. She can tell the truth, repair relationships, work, and choose how to use the remaining blade. Suma cannot return, but Riven does not need to become the accident forever. Her story also prevents a simple division between victim and offender. Riven experienced Noxian betrayal and participated in an invasion. She caused a death without intending it and allowed another man to remain accused. Later remorse cannot reverse those facts, but permanent condemnation would repeat the same belief that a person is only useful or worthless, with nothing in between. The healthier reading is not that Ionia erased her guilt. It gave guilt somewhere to go. Responsibility could become confession, work, and changed conduct rather than endless self-punishment. That movement keeps Riven from the top of the ranking, because tragedy did not close every future. Yasuo paid for the same event without knowing its cause. He grew beside his older half-brother Yone, whose discipline balanced Yasuo's impulsive talent. Elder Soma recognized Yasuo's unusual ability with the wind technique, and that recognition set him apart at the sword school where both brothers trained. During the Noxian invasion, Yasuo received the duty of protecting Soma. When battle drew near, he abandoned that post to help elsewhere, believing his skill could make a difference. The decision was not malicious. It still left the elder unguarded at the moment Riven arrived with the runic blade. Suma's death appeared to involve wind magic, and Yasuo's absence made suspicion immediate. He was accused not only of failing his duty, but of killing his own master. Remaining for judgment meant accepting a process he believed would condemn him, so he fled to search for the true cause. Flight deepened the appearance of guilt. Ionian warriors pursued him, and Yasuo defended himself while trying to survive long enough to clear his name. Every confrontation moved him farther from the student and protector he had been. Innocence regarding murder did not make him innocent of every consequence that followed. Yoan eventually came after him. The older brother carried duty to their school and community, while the younger brother carried the certainty that surrender would bury the truth. Their meeting placed family on opposite sides of an accusation neither man fully understood. Yasuo defeated Yon. The event became the central burden of his life, not because the brothers lacked love, but because love could not resolve the demands pulling them into conflict. Yasuo survived the person who had protected and guided him, then continued searching with another loss added to the one he was already trying to explain. When Riven's role finally became known, Yasuo received proof that he had not killed Soma. Exoneration answered the public accusation. It did not reverse his choice to leave the elder, the people harmed during his flight, or the encounter with Yone. This is where Yasuo's tragedy becomes more than false accusation. A simpler story would end when the evidence clears his name. His real burden continues because legal or social innocence cannot settle personal guilt. Yasuo knows he failed one duty even though he did not commit the crime used to define him. Yuan's later return created a second chance that was not a restoration. The brother stood before Yasuo again, but death and the spirit realm had changed him. Their relationship could move beyond pure hostility, yet they could not return to the school, childhood, and ordinary future that existed before Soma's death. Yasuo also trained Talia for a period, showing that he could pass knowledge forward rather than treating himself only as a source of harm. Teaching mattered because it placed him in a role once occupied by people he respected. The connection did not erase grief, but it proved he could contribute to another person's growth. Later travel took him beyond Ionia, including the journey connected to Bilgewater and the Shadow Isles. Movement had once been flight from accusation. It could now become a chosen road. That changed purpose marks partial recovery, even when the old memories remain. I rank Yasuo above Riven in immediate personal loss, because he lost his master, reputation, home, and brother through a crime he did not commit. Riven carried hidden truth and eventually found acceptance, while Yasuo had to live inside a public identity built from her accident. Riven ranks higher in moral injury from the invasion itself. She watched the empire she served reveal its contempt for both enemy and soldier. Yasuo's world collapsed through a narrower chain, though the family cost cut more deeply. Neither reaches the final tier because both retain paths toward repair. The truth emerged, Riven accepted responsibility, Yoni returned in an altered form, and Yasuo found purposes beyond proving innocence. Their lives cannot return to the beginning, but the future is not only repetition. Yasuo's case also demonstrates that guilt can survive factual correction. Telling him he did not kill Soma answers one sentence and leaves several others untouched. He still abandoned the assigned post, still fought those who pursued him, and still remembers Ioni falling through his own action. The difference between responsibility and total self-condemnation remains central. Yasuo can acknowledge mistakes without accepting the false claim that every disaster began with him. Recovery requires a more accurate burden, not the absence of one. That accuracy arrived late, after the accusation had already shaped years of wandering. Lost time cannot be returned by a verdict. A cleared name helps the person who exists now, while the young student who might have remained in his village belongs to a future that never occurred. I still find more hope in Yasuo's current path than in Renekton's. Yasuo learned the true sequence and can reinterpret the past through it. Renekton emerged from captivity with a false sequence planted so deeply that love became evidence of betrayal. Both brothers fought brothers, but only one now has access to the truth. Yuan's tragedy begins before his death because he spent much of his life balancing love with responsibility for Yasuo. As the older half-brother, he represented discipline, caution, and respect for rules. Those qualities made him dependable, yet they also placed him on the side of the institution pursuing Yasuo. The school shaped Ioni's identity through mastery and duty. Yasuo's natural talent with wind set the younger brother apart, while Ioni advanced through persistent training. There was affection without sameness. The brothers did not need identical strength to remain close. Soma's death turned their differences into a test with no safe answer. Ignoring the pursuit would mean abandoning duty and the community's judgment. Following it meant raising a weapon against the person Ioni had protected since childhood. Yuan found Yasuo and lost the confrontation. In the spirit realm, however, his path did not proceed normally. An Azakana, a lesser demon that feeds on specific negative emotions, attacked him. The creature had been drawn to the emotions surrounding his pursuit of Yasuo. Yon defeated the Azakana, yet the victory bound its mask to his face and returned him to the material world in a changed condition. He could perceive these demons and hunt them, learning their names and preventing them from feeding without limit. A family tragedy expanded into a supernatural duty. His return did not restore ordinary life. Yon existed between conditions, connected to the spirit realm and carrying the mark of the being that tried to consume him. He sought to understand what he had become, which meant his own identity turned into an unanswered problem. This is a different loss of agency from Atreus' possession. Atreus knew another mind had taken control, and later recovered the body as his own. Yon controls his actions, but the mechanism of his return and the bond with the mask remain uncertain to him. He is free to move while lacking a complete explanation of the self that moves. Meeting Yasuo again allowed the brothers to confront part of their history. Yon no longer treated him simply as the guilty fugitive he had pursued. The truth around Suma and the experiences after their confrontation changed what stood between them. Reconciliation, however, could not remove the Azakana or return Yon to his old place. Their relationship survived in altered form, close enough for recognition, but too changed for the future they once expected. Yon's current duty takes him toward demons rather than back into village life. I rank Yon near Atreus. Both lost control over the expected course of their lives through supernatural forces. Both returned from encounters that should have ended their stories, and both converted survival into protection for others. Atreus fights powers that treat mortals as vessels. Yon hunts beings that grow through private pain. Yoan's suffering is less prolonged than that of the ancient champions, and he retains skill, judgment, and a functioning relationship with purpose. Those facts keep him below Vhagar Amumu, and the Shadow Isle survivors. Transformation complicated his identity without erasing it. His calm outward manner should not be confused with resolution. Yoan still seeks names for the demons and an explanation for his own condition. Naming gives power and understanding, which suggests that every hunt also circles the question attached to his mask. The brothers now represent two different ways of carrying the past. Yasuo moves through guilt tied to actions he remembers. Yoan moves through a condition produced after the confrontation, learning what negative emotion can become when left to feed. One seeks a life beyond accusation, while the other prevents pain from taking on a life of its own. Riven completes the triangle by showing where the original accusation began. She broke the weapon, Yasuo carried the blame, and Yon enforced the judgment. None of the three possessed the whole story when their decisive choices were made. That missing information spread suffering more effectively than deliberate cruelty. Noxus created the weapon and battlefield, but within Ionia, silence and assumption did the remaining work. Riven feared confession, Yasuo feared false judgment, and Yon trusted duty without access to the hidden cause. Their current stories contain more repair than the ancient tragedies. Truth emerged. Riven found people capable of forgiveness without denial. Yasuo survived long enough to understand the accusation. Yon returned with a new purpose, and no longer exists only as the brother who came to punish him. For a ranking, I place Yasuo highest among the three, followed closely by Ionia and then Riven. Yasuo endured the widest direct combination of false blame, exile, family loss, and persistent guilt. Yon suffered a more radical transformation, but gained a focused role. Riven's moral injury ran deep, yet confession and community opened the clearest route toward rebuilding. The Order is not a judgment of character quality. It measures deprivation. Riven may have the strongest recovery because she learned to accept responsibility without letting Noxus decide her worth. Ionia may have the clearest new duty. Yasuo still carries several forms of guilt that no single truth can resolve. Their shared story remains tragic because repair is not reversal. Suma remains gone, the invasion happened, Yonia's condition continues, and Riven cannot return to the belief with which she first carried the runic blade. Healing moves forward from damage. It does not travel backward and prevent it. Warwick's history is less distant than the ancient prisons and ruined empires, but it attacks identity with similar force. Before his transformation, he had been a man in Zorn who tried to leave a violent past behind. The official biography preserves that earlier life only through damaged flashes, because Warwick himself cannot hold the memories in a stable order. Singed took him and used him as the subject of an experiment. Chemicals, machinery, and repeated procedures tried to draw out what the scientist believed lay beneath the man's attempt to become better. The stated purpose treated morality as a physical substance that could be stripped away until only a beast remained. I will keep the process non-graphic because the important fact is not anatomical detail. Warwick lost control of his body, environment, and treatment. Another person decided what he truly was, then changed him until the experiment appeared to support that decision. Singed initially judged the work unsuccessful. Warwick's transformation did not follow the expected schedule, and the body was discarded. The delay did not mean the procedure had failed. Change continued until the being later known in Zorn emerged from what had been left behind. The present Warwick carries pumps, chemicals, enhanced senses, and a predatory response to blood. He moves through Zorn hunting people whose violence marks them as prey. This limited preference suggests part of the earlier man's moral direction survived. He does not attack according to a carefully stated legal code, yet the instinct to direct danger toward those who cause harm remains. Memory returns in fragments and disappears again. That instability may be the worst part of his current existence. A person who remembers nothing can at least form a new identity around the present. Warwick receives pieces of another life without enough continuity to understand or recover it. Sounds, faces, and moments can feel familiar before the chemicals and instincts overwhelm them. Recognition opens a door and closes it almost immediately. The former self is neither fully gone nor reliably available, leaving Warwick caught between human memory and the body designed to replace it. Compared with Oriana, the difference in agency is complete. Oriana's transformation, developed through an attempt to treat illness, involved her father's care and included choices she understood. Warwick became the subject of someone else's theory. He did not receive a stable new life prepared around his needs. He emerged as evidence in an experiment. Compared with Vhagar, he retained less ability to narrate what happened. Vhagar's villainous performance reflects captivity, but he can speak, plan, and insist on an identity, even when that identity is distorted. Warwick struggles to keep the past long enough to decide what it means. Compared with Kalista, the similarity is much closer. Both were changed into hunters organized around one surviving emotional or moral pattern. Kalista answers betrayal. Warwick follows violence and blood, often directing his attention toward people who have harmed others. Each retains a fragment of the earlier person as a rule of pursuit. Kalista's transformation came through the ruination rather than a deliberate experiment focused on her. Warwick's suffering was designed by one mind and administered to prove a claim about him. That intention makes the violation especially personal. Duration keeps Warwick below the ancient champions. His condition has not lasted through the documented centuries attached to the Shadow Isles or the long ages of Darkin imprisonment. Severity, however, places him above many characters whose suffering continued longer. A shorter period can cut more deeply when it removes body, memory, and agency at once. His current purpose does not provide the clarity enjoyed by Ryze or Atreus. Ryze knows why he collects world runes, while Atreus understands the mortal freedom he defends. Warwick hunts through impulse, and the part of him capable of explaining the mission cannot remain consistently present. There may still be a human center. The biography deliberately preserves flashes of a man who wanted to change, and instincts that direct Warwick toward the cruel. That survival prevents me from calling the earlier self completely erased. It also increases the tragedy because something inside him can recognize the distance without controlling it. Warwick enters my final tier for that reason. He did not choose the experiment, cannot return to an ordinary body, and lacks dependable access to his own history. Escape from Singed ended direct captivity, but left the experiment operating inside every part of his present life. The streets of Zorn give him movement rather than freedom. He can choose a direction in the immediate sense, yet chemicals and sharpened instincts decide too much of what happens once he detects violence. A prison does not always need walls when the captor has rebuilt the prisoner's responses. No confirmed cure closes his story. Singed continues his work elsewhere, Zorn continues producing violence for Warwick to follow, and the memories continue breaking through without forming a stable whole. He survives, but survival has not yet become recovery. With Warwick, all 18 cases are in view. They range from a cursed child seeking one friend to ancient beings carrying mistakes across civilizations. A fair answer now requires returning to the 4 standards from the beginning, rather than choosing whichever story sounds darkest in isolation. The first standard is severity of loss. Several champions lost almost everything around them, but only a smaller group lost the internal structures needed to understand that loss. Aatrox lost his original body. Kalista lost much of her coherent personal memory. Renekton lost trust in his own sacrifice. Warwick lost stable access to the man he had been. Those four experienced damage that reached beyond possessions, status, and companionship. Yorick and Amumu suffered severe isolation without the same level of internal erasure. Yorick remembers who he is and why he remains on the islands. Amumu knows that he wants companionship even though the truth of his origin is uncertain. Their pain is organized around absence, while the first group also struggles with a damaged self. The second standard is duration. Ancient champions dominate here, though exact totals should not be invented. Aatrox's history stretches from ancient Shurima into modern Runeterra, with confinement inside the weapon occupying a vast portion of it. Lysandra has guarded the Watchers since the Age of the Three Sisters. Renekton remained sealed with Xerath until Shurima's return. Yorick, Kalista, Maokai and Viego continued beyond the ruination for more than 1,000 years. Rise also carried his task across an unnaturally long life, and Amumu's legends reach back to ancient Shurima without confirming a precise biography. Vhagar's imprisonment lasted long enough to reshape him, while Morgana's estrangement reaches back toward Demacia's early history. The Ionian trio and Warwick endured more recent tragedies, which lowers their position on duration without making the damage unimportant. The third standard is agency. Lysandra and Viego fall sharply here because their decisions helped create the disasters defining them. Riven also made choices that spread harm, though she acted without intending Soma's death and later accepted responsibility. Nasus chose to seal the tomb, but he did so at Renekton's request to contain Xerath. His painful agency served protection rather than desire. Aatrox did not choose confinement, but he now chooses to cause enormous harm. Kalista did not choose betrayal or transformation, and the erosion of memory complicates how freely her spectral identity acts. Yorick did not choose the ruination and continues working toward repair. Warwick had almost no agency in the experiment. Amumu's curse is likewise outside any confirmed choice. The final standard is current possibility. Riven has a real route toward accountability and community. Yasuo knows the truth and can build purposes beyond exile. Yone and Atreus converted altered lives into protection for others. Orianna can explore through a stable form she understands. Morgana may yet reconcile with her sister, even if nothing promises it. Maokai carries uncorrupted life that could help restore his home. Yorick still believes the Shadow Isles can be healed, though the task remains immense. Rise's mission has value and visible progress whenever another rune is secured. Nasus can act in a restored Shurima and may still reach Renekton, difficult as that appears. The bleakest futures belong to Aatrox, Kalista, Warwick, Renekton and Amumu. Aatrox sees no stable body or ordinary end available. Kallista's lost memories cannot be replaced simply by punishing another betrayer. Warwick has no confirmed method for reversing the experiment. Renekton cannot repair a relationship while he believes Xerath's false history. Amumu continues searching for companionship under a curse that makes closeness dangerous. Beginning at number 18, I place Orianna. This does not mean her illness and gradual physical replacement were minor. She watched every available option narrow until clockwork became the only way forward, and the last exchange preserved Corrin's life at the cost of her remaining human heart. Orianna finishes lowest because the transformation preserved so much of what mattered. She remembers, creates, chooses, and travels through a stable body that belongs to her. The loss changed the form of her future without eliminating the future itself. Among these 18 champions, she has the clearest evidence that radical change can become adaptation rather than permanent ruin. Number 17 is Riven. Noxus betrayed the ideal she used to understand herself. Her unit was sacrificed to a method of war she could no longer accept, and the attempt to break with that past caused Soma's death. Silence allowed Yasuo to carry the accusation, adding responsibility to trauma. Riven remains near the lower end because she eventually reached truth, judgment, and community. Ionia did not require her to pretend the past had vanished. It offered a way to make remorse useful. Her future contains accountability, work, and relationships, which places her far from champions whose only available tomorrow repeats the injury. At number 16, I place Morgana. The division of her family stretched across an extraordinary life, leaving a mother transformed by celestial power, a father lost amid conflict, and a twin sister following the opposite idea of justice. Morgana remained near Demacia without being able to belong openly to the society she protected. Compassion kept the loss from becoming her entire identity. Morgana can still recognize change in other people, which means she also inhabits a worldview where reconciliation remains possible. Nothing guarantees that Kael will return ready to repair their bond, but the road has not been erased by curse, broken memory, or bodily imprisonment. Number 15 is Yone. Duty sent him after Yasuo, the confrontation ended his former life, and the Azakana waiting in the spirit realm bound him to a changed existence. Returning gave him movement and purpose, without answering exactly what he had become. Yone ranks below the harsher transformations because he controls his actions and uses the new perception to protect others. The mask creates an unresolved identity, not total erasure. He can meet Yasuo with understanding, hunt the beings feeding on pain, and turn an impossible return into work that belongs to him. At number 14 stands Aatrox. The aspect of war took his body and treated his mortal will as an inconvenience. Losing Pylus, surviving Aatrox's attack, and later facing control during the Ruination, forced him to reclaim himself more than once. Atreus' suffering cut deeply into agency. But his answer created one of the strongest recoveries in this account. He did not merely escape possession. He took the name Pantheon and made it serve the mortal once dismissed as weak. His present identity grows from resistance rather than from the power that tried to replace him. Number 13 is Yasuo. One decision to leave his assigned post exposed him to an accusation of murder, drove him from home, and ended in conflict with Yone. Learning the true cause of Soma's death removed the false charge without removing personal responsibility. Yasuo ranks above the other modern Ionian cases because several losses converged on him at once. Home, reputation, master, brother, and confidence in his own judgment disappeared through the same chain. He remains outside the final tier because truth and renewed purpose give him room to build a life that is more than flight. At number 12, I place Maokai. He helped living things spread across once barren islands, welcomed a civilization that respected the land, and watched the Ruination corrupt the work of ages in a single catastrophe. His changed form carries the visible difference between cultivation and destruction. Maokai's heartwood also carries uncorrupted waters of life. That surviving core protects his identity and gives restoration a material possibility rather than a distant wish. The home remains ruined, but the first nature spirit of the islands still holds part of their former life within him. Number 11 is Viego. Losing Isolde destroyed the center of a king who had never prepared to rule without her. More than 1,000 years did not soften that grief, and spectral existence returned him to the same demand rather than allowing it to mature. He stops outside the top 10 because suffering cannot be separated from available choice when I compare degree of helplessness. Viego ignored refusal, invaded the Blessed Isles, and kept treating Isolde as something to recover regardless of her will. His grief was real, but he repeatedly transferred its cost to people with no part in it. At number 10, I place Lysandra. She lost sight, sisters, the world of the three sisters, and the possibility of leaving her ancient bargain behind. Guarding the Watchers became a duty with no safe retirement, and every age of secrecy tied her more tightly to the first mistake. Her power and responsibility keep her from climbing higher. Lysandra made the pact, concealed the truth, and harmed others to preserve the prison. She suffers under an enormous burden, yet she also retains the agency of the person managing it. The champions above her had more of their choices taken away. Number 9 is Nasus. His brother carried him to Ascension, later chose to enter the tomb with Zirith, and trusted Nasus to close the door. Obeying saved Shurima from an immediate threat and left Nasus alone with the knowledge of what obedience cost. The empire collapsed, other Ascended fell into conflict, and the brother who eventually returned believed Nasus had betrayed him. Nasus still possesses memory, reason, and meaningful action, which prevents a higher placement. His pain comes from understanding the truth perfectly, while being unable to make Renekton see it. At number 8 stands Rise. The Rune Wars taught him that civilization could destroy itself through objects people were certain they could control. Tyrus, his master and companion in containing that threat, also fell under the attraction of the world runes. Rise inherited an endless task, and the loneliness necessary to protect it. He ranks below victims of identity loss because the mission remains chosen, valuable, and understandable. Each secured rune confirms that his life accomplishes something, even when completion remains beyond sight. Number 7 is Vhagar. Mordekaiser isolated him from Bandle City, forced his celestial magic toward cruel service, and held him long enough to twist curiosity into a performance of evil. The present villainous identity still uses the emotional architecture of captivity. Vhagar's better instincts survived in ways he does not always recognize. That survival keeps him outside the top 5, but it does not make the damage shallow. Freedom released him from the Bastion, without releasing him from the need to prove that nobody could make him small or powerless again. At number 6, I place Amumu. The uncertain legends do not allow a precise origin, yet every reliable description returns to one fact: a lonely figure searches for friendship under a curse that makes closeness dangerous. His desire is ordinary, and the obstacle is attached to the very act of fulfilling it. Amumu falls just short of the top 5 because too much of the biography remains intentionally uncertain. I cannot rank an unconfirmed version of his age or childhood as established fact. Based on what the lore does confirm, his isolation is among Runeterra's purest tragedies, untouched by ambition, conquest, or a chosen burden. Number 5 is Warwick. Singed treated a man's attempt to become better as a layer that could be removed, then used forced transformation to prove that a beast existed beneath it. The result escaped the laboratory without escaping the experiment. Memory, body, and impulse no longer form a stable agreement. Warwick catches fragments of a human life and loses them again, while the remaining moral instinct appears through the violent people he hunts. He ranks this high because another person intentionally dismantled his agency, and no confirmed cure has restored it. At number 4 stands Renekton. He carried Nasus toward Ascension, entered the tomb with Zirath by choice, and accepted imprisonment to protect the world outside. Captivity alone would have placed him high. Zirath's manipulation changed the sacrifice into a false memory of betrayal. Renekton emerged unable to recognize his own courage. The brother he loved became the enemy he wanted to destroy, which meant imprisonment took both past and future. He remains below the final three because truth still exists in Nasus and could, at least in principle, reach him. The route is narrow, but it is not metaphysically impossible. Number 3 is Kalista. She served Camavor with honor, searched for a way to save Isolde, respected the Blessed Isles, and opposed the invasion when duty became wrongdoing. Hecarim answered that integrity with betrayal at the moment the kingdom needed it most. The Ruination continued the theft by wearing away personal memory while preserving the drive for vengeance. Kalista can punish another betrayer, yet each act strengthens the fragment that survived, instead of rebuilding the whole person. She ranks above Renekton because the witness to her earlier self has faded inside her. At number 2, I place Yorick. His ability to perceive spirits isolated him as a child. The Brethren of the Dusk gave that ability purpose. And the Ruination removed almost everyone who made that belonging real. The Waters of Life saved him only well enough to remain on the ruined islands. For more than 1,000 years of cursed history, Yorick preserved memory, duty, and hope inside the place that gave him every reason to lose them. He did not cause the disaster and has not answered it by attacking the wider world. Remaining morally intact required him to feel the loss rather than hide inside cruelty. Yorick comes closer to recovery than Aatrox, because the Shadow Isles can still be fought, and the life-giving water has not vanished completely. That possibility is also the reason he stays. Hope prevents surrender and extends the years he must spend among the remains of his order. Number 1 is Aatrox. He began as an honored ascended defender, faced the void in service to Runeterra, survived the fall of the empire that gave his power meaning, and became part of the darkened conflicts that followed. The punishment imposed on him did not merely restrain movement. It removed his original body and left awareness bound to a weapon. Nothing elsewhere in this comparison combines the same severity, duration, and absence of a stable solution. Aatrox spent ages unable to experience ordinary physical existence, then learned to construct temporary forms that never truly restored what he had been. Movement arrived without bodily freedom. His current cruelty does not win sympathy, and it does not remove the earlier facts. Aatrox chooses to destroy lives and directs his anguish toward people who did not imprison him. I rank suffering, not goodness. On that narrower question, the conscious loss of body and purpose across an ancient span places him first. Kalista lost a coherent past, but she still possesses a spectral form that expresses her surviving purpose. Yorick lost his world, but his own body and identity remain connected. Renekton lost the truth of his sacrifice, but that truth still exists outside him. Aatrox cannot recover his ascended body by being shown a fact, defeating one betrayer, or cleansing one land. The sword is both body and cell, which leaves no ordinary distance between prisoner and prison. When Aatrox controls a constructed vessel, the weapon remains the anchor. When the vessel fails, the confinement remains. That repeated return makes every apparent escape temporary. His earlier honor deepens the contrast without excusing the present. A being once remembered among defenders now treats the existence he defended as something to tear down. The distance between those purposes measures how completely punishment and despair changed him. I do not place him first because his suffering produced the greatest spectacle. The Ruination affected more people, the Watchers threaten a larger future, and the Rune Wars destroyed on a wider scale. Aatrox ranks first because the question asks what happened to one champion, and his sentence attacked the most basic conditions through which a self lives in the world. The final order is Oriana, Riven, Morgana, Yone, Atreus, Yasuo, Maokai, Viego, Lysandra, Nasus, Rise, Vhagar, Amumu, Warwick, Renekton, Kalista, Yorick, and Aatrox. Another fair ranking could move close neighbours 1 or 2 places, especially where Amumu's uncertain legend meets Warwick's documented transformation, or where Kalista's lost memory meets Yorick's prolonged solitude. The broad divisions are more stable than every exact number. Orianna, Riven, Morgana, Yone, and Atreus retain strong roots toward a meaningful future. Yasuo, Maokai, Viego, Lysandra, Nasus, and Rise carry large losses while preserving clear identity and agency. Vhagar and Amumu live inside conditions that directly frustrate who they want to be. Warwick, Renekton, Kalista, Yorick, and Aatrox face damage that reaches identity, memory, body, or an age-long absence of ordinary companionship. Agency changes how I interpret each story, but not where the pain occurred. Viego's grief remains grief even when his response becomes indefensible. Lysandra's fear remains fear even when she caused the danger. Aatrox's imprisonment remains terrible even after he becomes a threat to others. The opposite principle also holds. Responding with courage does not make a loss small. Atreus suffered possession even though he reclaimed himself. Riven endured betrayal even though she found accountability. Yorick's hope does not turn 1,000 years on the Shadow Isles into an easy vigil. Duration matters most when the condition stays active. Rise does not merely remember the Rune Wars, he continues collecting what caused them. Lysandra does not simply regret the Watchers, she maintains their prison. Yorick does not recall a vanished home from somewhere safe, he walks through its cursed remains. Memory matters because it determines who can make meaning from loss. Nasus remembers and suffers through clarity. Renekton remembers a manipulated version and suffers through false certainty. Kalista loses detail until one wound dominates. Warwick receives fragments too unstable to become a reliable account. The body matters without defining a person's worth. Orianna proves that physical replacement can coexist with agency, purpose, and connection. Atreus proves a body used by another power can be reclaimed. Warwick and Aatrox rank higher because their transformations removed consent and continue limiting control. Home also means more than geography. Riven found another relationship with Ionia after Noxus failed her. Yasuo can move beyond the village once truth replaces accusation. Yorick and Maokai cannot separate home from the task because the place itself remains the patient they are trying to save. Family appears throughout the ranking because close bonds create both strength and vulnerability. Nasus and Renekton reached ascension together, then became enemies through manipulation. Yasuo and Yone loved each other, fought under incomplete information, and met again after both lives had changed. Morgana and Kael divided over justice without eliminating the bond that makes the division painful. Viego shows the danger of treating love as ownership. Yorick shows devotion to a lost community without forcing that community to serve his private desire. The contrast keeps tragedy from becoming an excuse. Love can motivate repair, or it can become the language someone uses to justify control. No single type of loss automatically wins. Death around a champion can be devastating, yet a champion who retains memory, agency, purpose, and community may recover more fully than someone whose surroundings survive while identity is dismantled. That is why Warwick ranks above Viego despite the ruined king's longer history. Scale and intimacy also differ. Lysandra carries a world-ending responsibility, but she still operates through power and planning. Amumu's problem concerns one possible friend, yet the curse blocks the smallest form of comfort. A large threat is not always the largest personal deprivation. The final answer remains Aatrox, because his tragedy combines nearly every difficult category. He lost comrades and empire, experienced the damage of war against the void, lost his original body, endured ancient confinement, and found no stable recovery after regaining limited movement. What survived was awareness, and awareness became another part of the punishment. Yorick follows because he combines duration, innocence, isolation, and an unfinished duty while retaining enough compassion to understand the loss. Kalista follows because betrayal and magical transformation eroded the person who might have recovered. Renekton and Warwick complete the top 5 because manipulation or experimentation separated each from a truthful, stable self. None of these placements declare that suffering determines moral value. Aatrox is not the best person because he suffered most, and Orianna is not less worthy because she adapted well. The ranking measures what was taken and what remains available, not who deserves admiration. Runeterra's most tragic champions are rarely defined by one terrible day. They are defined by what that day keeps doing afterward. The tomb opens, but Renekton carries Xerath's lie outside it. The laboratory is gone, but Warwick carries Singed's experiment through Zorn. The ruination happened more than 1,000 years ago, but Yorick still walks the land it changed. That is the answer tying all 18 stories together. Loss becomes deepest when it does not stay in the past, when it enters memory, body, purpose, or the rules governing every future relationship. By that measure, Aatrox suffered the most, with Yorick, Kalista, Renekton, and Warwick closest behind him.